When I first walked into the glass building of Northbridge Consulting, I thought I had finally made it. After months of job hunting, sleepless nights polishing my resume, and countless rejections that chipped away at my confidence, this felt like a victory. The lobby gleamed with polished marble floors, modern lighting, and the constant hum of productivity. Everything about the place screamed success. For me, this wasn't just another job. It was a chance to start fresh, to prove that I was more than the small-town girl everyone underestimated. My parents were proud, my friends cheered me on, and for once, I felt like the universe was finally giving me what I deserved. And then there was Richard. Richard was the kind of boss people dream about, at least in the beginning. Sharp suits, a confident voice, and a knack for making everyone feel like they mattered. On my first day, he personally stopped by my desk, shook my hand firmly, and said, "Welcome aboard. I've heard great things about you already." That single sentence lit me up inside. Imagine the CEO of the division noticing you on your very first day. I walked out of the office that evening practically floating. The first few weeks were incredible. Richard seemed invested in my growth, always. Encouraging me during meetings, offering feedback that was constructive, never cruel. He introduced me to senior partners, praised my presentation skills, and even once said, "You've got leadership material. Stick with me and you'll go far." How could I not admire him? He was everything I thought a mentor should be. But if Richard was the shining star of my new world, there was also a shadow. Her name was Melissa. Melissa worked just a few desks down from me. At first glance, she seemed harmless, polished, friendly, always quick with a smile and a compliment. On my second day, she leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, we've all been the new kid. If you need anything, just ask me." It felt genuine, and for a while, I believed it. We even had lunch together a few times. She told me about her boyfriend troubles, her favorite brunch spots, even which people in the office to avoid. To anyone else, she was the perfect coworker, helpful, approachable, fun, but there was something in her eyes. Something calculating. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was just me being paranoid. After all, starting a new job is stressful, and sometimes you project your insecurities onto others. That's what I told myself anyway. The turning point came during my first big project presentation. I had spent weeks preparing, staying late after hours, rehearsing until my throat was sore. The day of the meeting, Richard gave me the floor. My heart was pounding, palms sweaty, but I delivered it flawlessly. At least I thought I had. The moment I finished, Melissa jumped in with a charming laugh and said, "I'm so glad the team loved the ideas I helped her polish. We stayed late last week going over those numbers." My stomach dropped. What? She had barely glanced at my notes when I nervously asked her for feedback one evening. She had brushed me off, scrolling through her phone the whole time. But now she was implying she was part of my success. Richard nodded approvingly and said, "That's teamwork. I like to see that." Everyone clapped. I forced a smile, but inside I was burning. That was the first red flag. Still, I swallowed. My anger. I told myself, it's fine, don't make waves, prove yourself by working harder. People will see the truth eventually. But as weeks turned into months, I noticed a pattern. Every time I made progress, Melissa was somehow there to attach herself to it. She'd casually drop comments like, "Oh, we brainstormed that idea together," or, "I suggested she try that approach." And Richard? He seemed to believe her. I couldn't help but notice how often Melissa lingered in his office, door closed. She'd emerge with that same smug smile, as if she had unlocked some secret. Power. I wanted to believe the best. I told myself maybe she was just networking better than me, maybe she was just more assertive, but deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Something wasn't right. But what I didn't know back then was that Melissa's friendliness was nothing more than a mask, and behind closed doors, she was weaving a betrayal so deep, it would shake the entire foundation of my career. The more time I spent at Northbridge Consulting, the more I realized something wasn't adding up. At first, it was little things, easy to dismiss, easy to explain away. But you know how your gut sometimes whispers when your brain is trying to rationalize? Yeah. My gut was screaming, and I was trying hard not to listen. Melissa, my friendly coworker, seemed to have this uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time. If Richard walked by my desk and complimented my work, she'd suddenly appear with a follow-up comment like, "Yes, I told her that approach would work well." If Richard asked me to handle a project, somehow, Melissa would end up added to the email chain, even though I never copied her. Coincidence? Maybe. At least that's what I told myself. Then there were the late-night office moments. A few times I stayed late to finish deadlines. Walking past Richard's office, I'd noticed the door closed, the lights still on. Nothing unusual about that, except more often than not, Melissa would walk out minutes later. Hair slightly tousled, lipstick faded with that smug little half smile on her face. I brushed it off. No way. That's not what I think it is. She had a boyfriend, didn't she? And Richard was married. He even had a photo of his wife and kids on his desk. My mind felt like it was playing tricks on me. I kept telling myself not to jump to conclusions. But the whispers started. One afternoon in the break room, I overheard two colleagues chatting in hushed tones. "Melissa's been spending a lot of time with Richard, hasn't she?" one said. The other smirked. "Please, you think it's about work?" They both laughed, quickly silencing themselves when I walked in. They gave me that guilty smile, the kind that says, "We know something you don't." I laughed it off, grabbed my coffee, and went back to my desk. But my stomach was churning. It wasn't just about office gossip anymore. Richard's attitude toward me was changing too. Remember how he once praised me openly, told me I had leadership potential? Now he seemed distant, cold even. If Melissa interrupted me during meetings, and she did, a lot, instead of shutting her down, Richard would nod along like her interruptions were valid. Sometimes he'd even cut me off mid-sentence to ask for Melissa's opinion. It stung. Every time it happened, I could feel my cheeks burning, my throat tightening. I wanted to scream, "Those are my ideas. That's my work. Why are you giving her the credit?" But instead, I bit my tongue. Because that's what you do when you're the new hire. You don't make enemies, you don't make drama. But inside, I was boiling. The moment it really clicked was during a project I had practically built from scratch. Richard had asked me to design a client strategy deck, a big deal, one that could make or break our team's reputation. I poured everything into it. Late nights, endless research, slides polished to perfection. The day of the client meeting, Richard presented the deck himself. I expected him to at least acknowledge my effort, maybe introduce me as the project lead. Instead, he stood at the head of the table and said, "Melissa and I have worked tirelessly on this presentation. I think you'll find it impressive." I felt my jaw drop. Melissa sat there with her fake, modest smile, nodding like she had earned every ounce of credit. She didn't even glance at me. The clients loved it. Everyone applauded. Richard clapped Melissa on the back and said, "See, this is why teamwork pays off." Teamwork? It was my work. Mine. I went home that night shaking. My chest felt heavy, my eyes stung with angry tears. I sat on my couch, replaying the meeting over and over again in my mind. How could Richard do this to me? How could Melissa lie so blatantly, steal so shamelessly, and not feel even a shred of guilt? I wanted to confront them both, right then and there. But something held me back. Maybe fear, maybe instinct. Because deep down, I was starting to realize this wasn't just about stolen credit. Something bigger was happening. And then came the proof. One evening, while rushing to grab some files from Richard's office after hours, I stumbled across something I was never meant to see. Something that confirmed every suspicion I had buried deep down. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of late night in the office when everyone else has already gone home. The building felt eerily quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights above the only sound keeping me company. I had stayed behind to finish some last-minute revisions for a client pitch. My eyes were heavy, my head aching, but I was determined to get it done. That's when I realized I needed a file Richard had taken earlier. His office was just down the hall, the door closed, but the light's still on. Strange. I thought he had already left hours ago. I hesitated. Knocking on your boss's office door after hours feels wrong somehow. But I needed that file, so I told myself I'd just peek in, grab it quickly, and go. When I reached for the handle, it turned easily. It wasn't even locked. And that's when I froze. Inside, Richard wasn't alone. Melissa was sitting on the edge of his desk, leaning forward, her hand brushing against his arm as they laughed quietly together. But it wasn't the kind of laugh you share over spreadsheets. No. This was different. Intimate, soft, charged. Richard looked up first, his eyes widening when he saw me in the doorway. Melissa followed his gaze, and for a split second, the mask slipped. Her smile disappeared, replaced with something sharp, almost triumphant. Like she had just won a game I didn't even know I was playing. The room felt heavy with silence. My pulse thundered in my ears. Sorry, I stammered. I just needed the client file. Richard cleared his throat, standing abruptly, putting distance between himself and Melissa. Right, of course, I'll get it. Melissa smirked, sliding off the desk as if nothing had happened. She smoothed her skirt, looked me dead in the eyes, and said in the sweetest tone, "Poor thing, working so late. You really should take better care of yourself." I wanted to slap that smug grin right off her face. Richard handed me the file without another word, his face stiff, his eyes avoiding mine. I mumbled a thank you and walked out, my hands trembling as I clutched the key folder. The second I stepped into the elevator, my knees almost buckled. My stomach was in knots. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't gossip or whispers. It was real. Richard and Melissa were having an affair, and suddenly everything made sense. Why Melissa always got the credit. Why Richard stopped praising me. Why every time I made progress, she somehow leaped ahead. It wasn't because she was smarter. It wasn't because she worked harder. It was because she had leverage. The kind of leverage that comes from behind closed doors. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about work anymore. This was personal. Melissa wasn't just stealing opportunities. She was sleeping her way into power. And Richard, the man I once admired, the mentor I trusted, he was complicit in it all. I barely slept that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying every little moment, every coincidence that I had brushed off. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't me being insecure. I had been right all along. By morning, my shock had hardened into something else. Anger, cold, burning anger. And with that anger came clarity. I couldn't just sit back and let them keep walking all over me. If I did, I'd always be the underdog, always the pawn in someone else's game. No, I was done being quiet, but I also knew I couldn't act recklessly. If I confronted them head-on, they'd deny everything. Worse, they'd make me out to be the crazy jealous one. I had no proof. Just one awkward moment in an office that they could easily explain away. So I made a decision. I would get proof. Ironclad proof. And when the time was right, I'd make sure the entire world knew exactly who they really were. Because revenge. Revenge would taste so much sweeter if it was undeniable. So I started my quiet war, smiling to their faces, pretending to know nothing, all while secretly collecting every piece of evidence that would eventually bring their entire world crashing down. From the outside, nothing seemed different. Every morning I showed up at Northbridge Consulting with a polite smile plastered on my face, coffee in hand, ready to play the part of the dutiful employee. If you looked at me, you'd think I was fine, calm, collected, professional. But inside, I was a storm. I knew the truth now. And I knew I couldn't just march into Richard's office and accuse him of having an affair with Melissa. That would have been suicide. He was in a position of power, respected, admired. Melissa had wormed her way into his confidence. Together, they had control of the narrative. If I spoke up too soon, I'd be the one branded as bitter, jealous, unstable. So I swallowed my pride and played along. And while I played nice, I planned. The first step was gathering proof. Real proof. Not whispers, not suspicions. Something no one could deny. It started small. I began keeping meticulous records of my work, emails, drafts, presentations with time-stamped versions saved to a private drive. Every time Melissa tried to swoop in and take credit, I made sure I had receipts. Screenshots, forwarded emails, saved files. She might stand in front of clients and smile like she owned the room, but I had the digital trail to prove otherwise. Next, I turned my attention to Richard. I knew they were careful, but not careful enough. Late nights at the office, lunches that mysteriously stretched into hours, business trips that aligned a little too neatly with Melissa's absences. I started tracking patterns, not obsessively, but strategically. If Melissa left her desk, at 2:15 I'd glance at Richard's calendar. If Richard's door was closed for longer than usual, I'd note the time. At first it felt almost paranoid, like I was losing myself in the hunt. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of that moment in his office. The laughter, the touch, the look on Melissa's face when she realized I had seen them. No, this wasn't paranoia. This was reality. One evening, luck handed me a gift. Melissa had left her desk in a rush, clearly flustered, her phone buzzing nonstop. She didn't notice she'd left her drawer slightly open. I wasn't planning to snoop, but curiosity tugged at me. I glanced around, heart pounding, and pulled the drawer open just a little more. Inside was a folder, a travel itinerary. 2 tickets. Same destination, same dates. One in her name, the other in Richard's. A conference trip, supposedly. But the tickets weren't booked under the company's travel account. No, these were personal. Paid with a shared credit card. That was the smoking gun. I quickly snapped pictures and closed the drawer, my hands trembling. My pulse was racing so fast I could barely breathe. I had them, but I didn't stop there. No. If I was going to take them down, I needed more than just a weekend getaway. I needed to show not only the affair, but also how they were sabotaging me in the process. So I waited and documented every stolen idea, every instance where Richard dismissed me and elevated her, every snide comment Melissa whispered when no one else could hear. Piece by piece, I built my arsenal, and the more I collected, the calmer I became. Because the truth was on my side, and the truth, once exposed, is like fire. It spreads fast, and it leaves nothing standing. By the time the company holiday gala rolled around, I was ready. It was the perfect stage. Executives, clients, colleagues, all in one place. The night was meant to be about celebration, about showcasing the company's success. But for Richard and Melissa, it was about to become the night everything came crashing down. And I would be the one to light the match. The holiday gala began with laughter, champagne, and music, but it ended with Richard and Melissa's darkest secret unveiled in front of everyone who mattered. The night of the company's holiday gala was electric. Strings of white lights draped across the ballroom ceiling, crystal chandeliers sparkled, and laughter echoed as people mingled in sleek tuxedos and glittering gowns. Waiters glided through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was the kind of event where everyone put on their brightest smiles, their most polished selves. I had my smile too. But mine wasn't for celebration. Mine was for war. Richard arrived looking every bit the polished executive, tailored suit, confident stride, his arm around Melissa's waist. She wore a scarlet dress that screamed for attention, and the way she leaned into him, you'd think she owned the place. I saw a few heads turn, whispers exchanged. People noticed. They always noticed. But tonight, they wouldn't just whisper. Tonight, they'd know. The evening began with speeches, executives thanking teams for their hard work, clients praising results. Richard was set to give one of the key addresses, presenting the company's biggest success of the year, the strategy deck I had created, the one he had stolen credit for. I sat at my table, heart pounding but face calm. Inside my clutch was a small USB drive, weeks of evidence, screenshots, emails, calendar overlaps, even the photos of those matching travel tickets. But the pièce de résistance was the presentation itself, the original deck, complete with metadata proving it was mine. When Richard was called to the stage, the room applauded. He adjusted his tie, flashing Melissa a quick smile as if to say, "Watch me shine." He launched into his speech, smooth and practiced. "This year," he began, "has been one of innovation, dedication, and teamwork. Melissa and I worked tirelessly to craft the strategy that brought our client record-breaking results." My blood boiled, but I stayed seated, because I knew what was coming. The moment he clicked the remote to start the slides, instead of his polished version, the big screen flickered, and up popped my version, but not just the deck. The first slide read in bold letters, "The truth." "Behind the lies!" Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Richard froze, remote still in hand, his face draining of color. Melissa stiffened in her chair, her painted smile faltering. I sat tall, my pulse hammering in my ears as slide after slide appeared. First, the metadata screenshots, time-stamped files showing I had created the deck weeks before Richard ever touched it. Then, the email exchanges where I sent drafts, only for Melissa to mysteriously, coincidentally, present them as her own. Next, side-by-side comparisons of client notes, mine versus theirs, proving my work had been stolen, word for word. Whispers filled the room, sharp and relentless. People leaned forward, eyes darting between Richard on stage and Melissa at her table. But it wasn't over. The final slides appeared. The matching travel itineraries. His name, her name, same destination, same dates, not billed to the company, and then a photo. That photo I snapped outside his office that night, when the door wasn't shut all the way. Melissa perched on his desk, her hand on his arm, their faces too close to be professional. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even a few shocked laughs. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, he's been sleeping with her." Another voice said, "No wonder she got all the credit." Richard's face was beet red, his hands gripping the podium. This is a mistake," he stammered, his voice cracking. "This is a malicious fabrication." But no one believed him. The evidence was undeniable. Melissa bolted from her chair, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor as she stormed toward the exit. People turned to watch her, their eyes filled with judgment. She didn't even look back. Richard tried to salvage it, but every word out of his mouth sounded desperate, hollow. The executives exchanged looks, their smiles gone. The clients whispered to one another, clearly horrified. And me? I sat there, calm, collected, sipping my champagne. My hands were no longer shaking, my breath no longer ragged. For the first time, in months, I felt powerful. Because in that moment, Richard wasn't the respected executive anymore. Melissa wasn't the golden employee. They were exposed, and everyone knew exactly who they were. The fallout from that night was even more explosive than I imagined. Careers destroyed, reputations ruined, and one final twist that no one, not even me, saw coming. The silence that followed the last slide felt deafening. Richard stood frozen at the podium, his jaw clenched, his face a dangerous shade of red. The murmurs around the ballroom weren't whispers anymore, they were daggers, each one cutting into what was left of his carefully curated reputation. Executives who once nodded approvingly at him now exchanged disgusted glances. Clients looked visibly uncomfortable, whispering to their assistants. Melissa was long gone, her scarlet dress vanishing into the night like a warning flare. And then the inevitable happened. The CEO of the firm, a stern woman named Catherine Hart, stood up from the head table. Her voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Richard," she said, calm but cold, "I think it's best you step outside." Richard opened his mouth, searching for words, but nothing came. He slammed the remote onto the podium and stormed. Off stage, his footsteps echoing through the stunned silence. I stayed seated, sipping the last of my champagne, my heart steady. I didn't need to say a word. The evidence had spoken louder than anything I could have dreamed of. By Monday morning, the company was buzzing with the scandal. Emails flew back and forth, HR was scrambling, and the gossip was relentless. Melissa didn't return to work. Rumor had it she had resigned effective immediately. Richard tried to hang on, insisting it was all a smear campaign, but the executives weren't buying it. By Wednesday, his name was scrubbed from the website, officially terminated, and I became the quiet hero. People stopped me in the hallways, whispering thank yous, some even apologizing for not believing me sooner. Clients who had once overlooked me now asked specifically for me by name. The recognition, the respect, it felt intoxicating. But beneath the triumph, there was something else, an emptiness. See, I thought revenge would heal me, that exposing them would fill the cracks they left inside me. And in some ways, it did. Watching Richard fall from grace, watching Melissa lose everything, it was delicious, satisfying, like the universe was finally set right. But late at night, when the adrenaline faded, I realized something haunting. Melissa had once looked me in the eye and said, "Poor thing, you should take better care of yourself." And Richard, the mentor I once trusted, had chosen her over integrity. Yes, I had destroyed them, but the betrayal? That stayed. The real twist came a few weeks later. I received a call from Catherine Hart, the CEO. She invited me into her office, a place I'd only ever entered nervously before. "Sit down," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside was an offer letter, promotion, senior consultant, my own small team. But there was something else too. A note she had scribbled at the bottom. "We need people who see the truth, even when it's inconvenient. Don't waste that gift." And that's when it hit me. The revenge wasn't just about destroying Richard and Melissa. It wasn't just about proving I was right. It was about reclaiming my voice, my worth, my place in a world that had tried to push me aside. As I walked out of her office that day, the offer letter in my hand, I realized I had gained far more than I lost. Richard lost his career. Melissa lost her reputation. But me? I gained power, respect, and most importantly, the unshakable knowledge that I'd never let anyone silence me again. Because revenge, when done right, isn't just payback. It's transformation. And for the first time in months, I smiled, not out of spite, not out of triumph, but out of free. So in the end, their betrayal became my turning point. They thought they could use me, silence me, walk all over me. Instead, they built the stage for their own downfall. And maybe that's the real lesson. When you try to burn someone else's light, you risk setting fire to your own world.